Hi, my name is Jörg. I'm the senior developer of our product called Single Sign-On, which includes a new feature which is also available separated called User Sync. And what I would like to do today is to show you some use cases on user management and how our product can help you in that. Okay, let's talk about the initial situation like you may already know. You got your Jira, you got your Confluence, you got it on-premise, hosting it by yourself. And you got your users in Active Directory, and what you usually do, you connecting using an LDAP sync. So users can authenticating by entering their Active Directory password into the normal Jira login page. So only one password, everything clear, everything fine. Okay, this is the simple use case, not much to talk about this. But if it can come a little bit more complex. For example, your company decided we're using Azure AD now because we're using Office 365 and we want to have the users managed in the cloud for some reasons. You can run into some challenges. So the situation is like this: you got your company, you got the internet. To bring a little bit more in the mix is you decided that you put your Jira and Confluence off premises, so you go to a hosting provider and say, okay, I want to have it managed by you. So it's outside your building, it's outside your internal network. And you decided, or your management decided, or whoever decided, okay, we're using Azure AD now for providing the users. This can be challenging because there is no LDAP anymore. And this gives us two big questions. The one is, how do we get the users? Because we cannot sync them using LDAP, because we don't have, even if we would have LDAP connectivity, Azure AD just doesn't provide it. So we need to have another way. And we need a way to how we authenticate the users, because they cannot just use the Azure password in that way, because there's no LDAP binding or similar thing in this. So the solution can look like this. You got your Jira, you got your Confluence, you got your Active Directory. And you put in User Sync, which comes as part of the SAML solution we provide. Put it to your Jira and your Confluence. And it's using the Azure Graph API, which is a REST-based API for user management, which is provided by Azure instead of LDAP. So the result is you replace your LDAP with the Azure connector. And that solves your issue with authenticating, with getting the users. You just pull them from there. You can sync them periodically, like you used to do it with LDAP, and you can update these users anytime a user logs in to have any change applied directly. Then we got the second issue is the authentication. Authentication then takes place using SAML version 2.0. The SAML protocol itself is a little bit complicated, but what happens there is that you got your Jira. Your browser is redirected to the identity provider, which is Azure in this case. This identity provider then does the authentication and sends you back to Jira to just log you in, because it just trusts that Azure has authenticated you correctly. So we got, in the mix, we got now single sign-on, which means if you have authenticated once against Azure, and you go to the next application, for example, you have logged into Jira, you open Confluence, Azure will not ask you for a password anymore because it already knows you in this session. You know, you already authenticated, so no need to ask you again. This is a very convenient feature, but it also allows you to bring in stronger authentication mechanisms in the mix. So it's a bigger security thing. If you have the requirement to use stronger authentication than just passwords, and you have the requirement to bring this to the Atlassian stack, this is a possible solution to that. So you enforce the users to use Azure for authentication or any other identity provider. And any kind of authentication you configure there, may it be two-factor authentication, may it be some passcard stuff or whatever the market gives you, it will be applicable to the Atlassian applications. Okay, this was, you just migrated to this one. But then you come to a little bit more difficult place where you have multiple identity sources. We talk about the power of connection and the power of collaboration. So what you have here is that you got your Active Directory with LDAP, like you had it before, and you still have this LDAP connectivity, but you have some of your users now added to Active Directory. This can be during the migration, that you say you migrate your users department per department, for example, or you have acquired another company which is already using Azure and you want to bring them to the Atlassian stack. You got some more users using Okta as authentication provider because it's an external contracting company, for example, where say you want to collaborate with. And you have maybe even more, you have users coming from a G Suite system. So this gives us a little bit more challenges, a few more challenges which could come out here is, the one thing is you have multiple sources of users. So you got users from G Suite, you got users from Azure, and if the user appears on Jira, Jira doesn't know about that user yet, so it doesn't know, is this a G Suite user, is this an Azure user? So we need to find a way to find that out. And what we also want to do is we need to control who is synchronized from these identity sources. On the one side, you could say, okay, identity management is something the identity management system should do, and we don't really want to care about. But especially in bigger organizations, this is often not enough because you as the guys responsible for the Jira and the Confluence systems don't want to ask the identity provider guys anytime if you want the user to have a specific permission. You want to do this on your own. You want to have to control who does what on your system. And the other thing is that the user IDs are sometimes not unique. You have a G Suite user, John Doe. You have an Azure user, John Doe. These are separate users, so you need to treat them separately. And the user IDs are sometimes formatted very differently. So sometimes you got the full email address. Sometimes you got some strange IDs. I think enterprises are often very, let's say they have good ideas on how to format user IDs that you never recognize what user that is. So, and the thing is, you may have different meanings what a group means, because the thing is on a Atlassian stack, a group is more or less a string. It's a name with a group, so, which represents the group. And it could be that on the one thing, a group called executives could be something very different than the executives group on the other system. And you need to merge this somehow. So the solution could be in this case that you say you use user sync, where we have different connectors available. And you have SAML for authentication. There's a special thing about Active Directory. You can put it in a service called ADFS, which is part of the Windows system, which talks SAML based on Active Directory data. So this can also bring you this single sign-on functionality for your on-premise users. So you can have multiple connectors in the system, so you can have any number of connectors. So instead of adding a user directory in Jira or Confluence, you add a connector. There is a set of them available. And you can have one directory per connector. So you have an Azure directory and one login directory, or in this case, a G Suite directory, to separate the users like you used to do it. Okay, currently we have these 5 connectors available, which is Okta, G Suite, Azure Active Directory, OneLogin, and Keycloak. And we have the opportunity to provide custom connectors, which can be quite useful. We have a kind of a lighthouse project with the University of Vienna. They had a situation, they have a homegrown specific REST-based authentication system, so they have a REST service which provide them the users. And, but it's not talking LDAP or any standards, so they needed to have something special. So what we did there is we provided a special connector to them. And the system is designed in a way that you just install the off-the-shelf product from the marketplace, and you can put in a separate, very small plugin, which is custom then, but only contains your real business logic. So you can have custom code without the overhead of having a special version somewhere. So we don't provide them a special service, a special version of the product we have itself, but only this little connector. So they don't have the issue that they cannot update from the marketplace because they have this special build or something like this. So in the future, we plan to open the API for this. So maybe a solution provider, for example, could also provide you a custom connector, or you could even do it on your own. All right, then we come to the issue that we now have the users from all the systems. We come to the issue that we need to select where to authenticate these users. We have several options for that. The one thing is the selection page. So we just ask the user. We just put in a portal page where they say, okay, what user are you? This is customizable, so you can configure it in a way that it fits your needs, and maybe says something else other than authenticate against Azure AD, because 90% of the users will not know what it is, usually. And give the users the selection. The other way is just ask them for the email address and use some email domain matching to say, okay, that email domain authenticates against this identity provider, and redirect them correctly. And we have some other way to differentiate it using request headers. So we check for the initial request and check for some headers to automatically divide them. This is usually coming in situations where you have a reverse proxy in front of your installation, and maybe your inbound users using Active Directory are not using the reverse proxy, so you have different headers, and you can say, okay, this is going this direction or going that direction. So without the users even seeing something like this. And we got one important thing is that we can transform and filter the users. So when using user sync, you can map any attribute of your user sync of your identity system to your Jira system. By default in Jira, this is the email address, the full name, and the username, which is everything you need to provide to create a user in Jira. And what you also can do is you can add additional attributes which are stored alongside the users, which is not very useful on Jira yet, but there's more to come. But it can be very useful in Confluence, where you, for example, can fill these additional department fields or stuff like this, which Confluence provides. And the main important thing is we're using additional attributes which are hidden, in this case with this Okta ID thing, because what we do here is that we use the Okta ID, which is a generate unique identifier, which is unique to Okta in this case, to hold the connection between the Okta user and the Jira user. So if the user is renamed, the user is also renamed in Jira and not recreated, which can be a quite important or quite painful thing if you rename a user in a system and your synchronization breaks all your user database because you have a new user who has never logged in before. You can translate these attributes using regular expressions, and you can have any number of transformation rules for that. So it allows you to apply a set of rules to your users to align the user IDs between the different systems, or even make them unique between the different systems by prefixing something or whatever you need to make this work. It's a very powerful thing with this regular expression thing. It can be quite error-prone, but it's the great power of it. And what we also can do is that you can have the group management. As I said before, you want to control who does what on your Jira. So what you can do here is we can decide which groups are synchronized. We can transform group names. So we can say a user with a specific Azure AD group is applied to another group on Jira. And you can say any user gets specific local groups, or only a subset of groups is synchronized. It's, for example, the one thing we learned on the hard way. We brought out the product, and the customer came in and said and complained that he now any user has 265 groups or so, because in Azure they having this huge amount of groups for any reason, but they only wanted the 5 groups which are relevant for them. This is now also working. Okay, and as a last part, we have some. I got a little simplified use case we have seen before is you got your Active Directory, but you decided that you want to host your Jira and Confluence externally. So your Jira and Confluence is off premises again. You got your firewall to the internet, so nobody comes into your internal network, and you got your Active Directory internally. And you want these users to be available on Jira and Confluence. And this can be quite challenging because your Active Directory is behind a firewall, so you cannot directly communicate between Jira and the Active Directory for security reasons, because the security guy in your company will maybe make you some trouble if you said, can you open the firewall to the LDAP port that we can synchronize users? They don't like it usually. So the solution in this case would be you bring in ADFS, which is an additional service on your Windows. This can be reachable from the outside or not. It depends on your situation. And you bring in the single sign-on solution to Jira and Confluence. And the interesting thing here is that your Active Directory or even your ADFS don't have to directly talk to your Jira and Confluence, because everything happens through the user's browser. So if the user can reach ADFS and can reach Confluence, he can log in, even if they are firewalled between each other. So you do this authentication via SAML 2.0, which does the authentication, but not yet the user provisioning part, because there is no REST API, something like on ADFS, where you could synchronize users from, like we do it with Azure. But what we can do is, okay, after delegating authentication to ADFS, you can do Windows integrated authentication, which is the initial use case where we created the product for. The initial use case was a convenience thing. Users log into their Windows workstation and they don't want to log in again into Jira. They just want to be logged in because they already typed in their password. So this is what ADFS provides. So it can pass through your workstation login to SAML. And we can do just-in-time user provisioning. That means ADFS or any other SAML identity provider can bring additional attributes while you're logging in. In this case, the full name, the email address, and the user ID. And what we can do now is we can create these users during the login, apply them to some groups. We have something similar, as you've seen before, about group transformation stuff. So any user who is logging in is created automatically, so you don't need to create them beforehand. But this can have some downside. The thing is, you can create the users, but the big question is, how do I get rid of them again? Because if you delete them on ADFS, they will just stay forever because they never can log in again. So we never recognized something that happens with that user. And for that, we have a special user sync connector. We call it the cleanup connector, where you can say, okay, you disable any user which hasn't logged in for a specific amount of time. So you can get your licenses freed up again. And what happens if the user logs in the next time, the user is reactivated automatically. So you can, with that way, you can implement kind of a concurrent user licensing model, where you say, okay, you have 10,000 potential users on your system, but you know that only thousands of them are using them. So you can use your 1,000 users licenses. A license is assigned anytime a user logs in, and the license is removed again if this user is inactive long enough. Okay, I would like to invite you to give it a try. Just try it out. We have a workshop tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And you can just visit us on our website and start your trial and install it. And you can go to resolution.de/go/support and book a screen share session, for any additional questions. You can we offer free support during the integration phase, so you don't need to pay anything beforehand. So we support you the same way as we support paid customers during your trial period. Okay, that's it from us. I hope we see you tomorrow.